Now let's cross live to our correspondent William and Denslow in New York. The new UN Security Council is holding an emergency session on the Ukraine crisis. William, since the announcement from the Russian president on military operations in the Donbass region, any more remarks or maybe even dramatic scenes from the ongoing emergency session?
Absolutely, some quite extraordinary scenes at the Security Council. Many members of the Security Council requesting to speak for a second time. The reason for that, the first time they spoke, was before that announcement from Russia's president of this military operation in Ukraine. Now, that prompted a very strong message. What we heard from Linda Thomas-Greenfield, the US ambassador to the UN, said that it was a grave emergency, saying that they will table a resolution on Thursday here at the UN Security Council to condemn that action. That was reiterated by the likes of the United Kingdom. We heard an incredibly impassioned and emotional response from Ukraine's UN ambassador, calling for Russia to be stripped of the rotating presidency at the Security Council that they currently hold, also saying that Russia, those that are responsible for these actions, won't go to purgatory, adding that war criminals go straight to hell. An incredibly powerful message there from Ukraine. We heard from Russia's ambassador to the UN that chaired the meeting. He very much rejected those assertions from Ukraine, stating that Russia was not acting aggressively towards the people of Ukraine, but what he said was the junta in charge of Ukraine at the moment.
Well, William, as we're talking about this, the emergency session goes on, and maybe UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres will speak again. We also recall his opening remarks for tonight's session, very dramatic, directly calling on Mr. Putin to stop attacking and give peace a chance. Yes, of course, the war of words goes on there, but will this emergency session produce any concrete result?
Well, when it comes to this particular emergency meeting, no, it won't. It has now concluded. What we're now expecting is for council members to convene again on Thursday and for this draft resolution to be tabled. What we can expect is some very powerful language indeed from the likes of the US, from the likes of the UK, France as well, condemning what we're seeing from Russia and urging them to step back. Of course, Russia is a veto-wielding member of the UN Security Council. Essentially, any kind of draft resolution we can widely assume to be dead on arrival. It's seen as a symbolic gesture, though, and a sign that the international community is standing in solidarity against Moscow's actions. There were pleas from Ukraine's foreign minister speaking at the UN General Assembly earlier on Wednesday, saying that it was up to every single member of the UN to uphold their duties under the UN Charter to stand with the Ukrainian people, and that the UN does have the power to keep Russia in check if the UN works together. But, of course, the UN Security Council is the body at the UN that has the most tools in its armory when it comes to tangible steps that can be taken against an aggressor. And with Russia's power of a veto obviously set to be used if indeed this draft resolution is tabled, many fear that the UN Security Council will be essentially powerless to act.
Thank you very much. Our correspondent William Denslow in New York. Now, the UN Security Council's second emergency session on the Ukraine crisis has just concluded. We'll try to bring you more details on that later in our coverage. But for more insight, let's talk to independent political and economics affairs commentator, Mr. Einar Tangen in Beijing. Thank you very much for joining us. Dramatic changes overnight on the Ukraine crisis. First of all, do you think the West, US and its NATO allies had forecasted this latest announcement from Mr. Putin announcing special military operation in Donbass?
Well, at least the Biden administration will be trumpeting the fact that they said, "I told you so." It will be less clear in terms of the European allies. They thought that there was a chance at some sort of negotiated settlement, that Putin was trying to make a point. At this juncture, though, it's clear that the military option is on the table and that Putin intends to use it.
Now, from the just concluded UN Security Council's emergency session, of course, the Ukraine ambassador to the UN has called this a war. Russia has declared war on his own country. But speaking after him, Germany's ambassador said it's a military escalation rather than calling it directly a war. And Germany is also calling for Normandy format meetings. But let's remember, Mr. Putin has said that the Minsk II agreement has collapsed. Do you think there will be any more room for diplomatic efforts?
Well, just keep in mind, the Normandy format excludes the U.S. It's basically Ukraine, Russia, France, and Germany. So they want to settle this. And I think what the German side is signaling is that they want to return to the table. They do not want more hyperbole, more chicken little talk from the Biden administration escalating this. They want to give some room for Moscow to come back to that table. Obviously, the military option is going to play out first, but at some point there has to be a meeting around the table and some sort of workable solution has to be found.
Well, in his speech announcing the decision sending troops into the Donbass region, President Putin also emphasized several times that Russia doesn't have a plan to invade Ukraine or start a full invasion. Do you think at this moment Ukraine were believing those statements?
Obviously not. The reaction has been impassioned and strong. Remember that this is a geopolitical situation that was started by NATO, and unfortunately it's going to be the Ukrainian people who have suffered and will continue to suffer as this plays out.
And also in his speech, Mr. Putin said the US and its allies had lied to Russia and all of Russia's security demands were not taken seriously. How much the West should be blamed for the escalation this time?
Well, the West blindly adheres to this idea that they're not at fault, that it's always Russia at fault, or in any case, when it's somebody they don't like or want to compete with, it's their fault. China has felt that barb itself. In this particular case, Baker, when he was Secretary of State, promised when the fall of the USSR that there would be no encroachment of NATO or the EU into Soviet bloc countries. Obviously, that did not. That promise was not held. Now, putting aside the fact that Baker does not have the power to make those kinds of deals, you have a situation where America and Europe have potentially very different ideas about this. They're going to probably show kind of a united front on this initially, but you can already start to see that Germany is looking for a side door to get this off this military track. The U.S. has not proposed anything other than condemnation. So at this time, you can say who is at fault in the near term. Right now, it's the fault of Russia because they have used the military option. But long term, it has been a situation that has been brewing for quite some time. It was alluded to in 2007 when Putin addressed the Munich Security Council and said bluntly Russia had been lied to. They had been disrespected, and that he was no longer in favor of the world order that was being led by the United States and its allies.
Now, if the situation gets worse, and that's a big if, should Ukraine count on any substantial Western help, quote unquote help, of course?
Well, there's two parts to that question. The first one is no one wants to get involved directly in that war. Because, quite frankly, it could lead to escalation and expansion of the war front. Second, there's the logistical issue. Getting men and troops and their battle formations and equipment into Ukraine at this time would be virtually impossible. The Ukrainians are basically at a 5-to-1 disadvantage versus their Russian counterparts. It's very difficult to see how they can be stopped. However, as I've said before, it'll be very difficult for Russia to hold on to a country which does not want them if resistance comes forward, especially in the cities where urban warfare will not favor the Russians.
So now let's go back to the reasons for President Putin's latest decision authorizing this special military operation in Donbass. He's citing several reasons. One, of course, is, quote, protecting the people there, and second is stopping genocide in those regions. Of course, as a media organization, we're not consenting that term genocide. But what events could have prompted Mr. Putin to say so?
Well, I don't think this is events. I think this is a rationale. This is what he's going to say. As they say, that's my story. I'm going to stick to it. He needs some reason to do what he's doing. The long-term reason is obviously NATO and his desire for ironclad security guarantees, which have not been forthcoming. So he has taken the situation into his own hands. I don't think it's really necessary to look at the details. Yes, there have been atrocities created or alleged been created on both sides, but they're not of the scope or extent to which anyone could say that this is some sort of mass genocide or anything like that. Obviously, real politics dictates that you say something when you do something, and that's how most people are going to react to this.